This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you all again for taking your time out to attend this racial equity dialogue here at the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness. Um, we welcome you today to our sixth total and second this year installment of our racial equity dialogue series hosted by our North Carolina Balance of State, COC, Racial Equity Subcommittee. My name is Jeremy Ratcliffe. I serve as project assistant here at NCCEH, and I will also be serving as your facilitator today. We have a great topic here today, and we feel like this will make for an excellent conversation. We also have some great panelists for you here today, who we're going to let introduce themselves. But I wanted to note just a few housekeeping items that we have before we begin. We are here today to talk to you about the laws and policies that affect racial disparities and why that gap keeps widening. Why it's begun to become a little bit harder servicing people of color. And so these panelists today have definitely come from a wide background of, I would say, leadership, direct service, and a little bit of advocacy as well. And so just as a reminder, for a few housekeeping items, please keep your microphone on mute. We will definitely have time for questions at the end. There will be a Q&A part. Please enter anything into the chat during that time. Staff are monitoring the chat to function for questions. We are committed to making this a safe space, and we definitely do not tolerate any offensive language, any offensive comments. We're here to listen to a lot of good folks, so we definitely want to keep that out. Staff will remove anybody from the meeting that is not able to maintain this respectful presence. We are grateful to our facilitators and panelists offering their time and expertise today to talk about a real difficult situation that we're all facing. So once again, we thank you for being here. We thank you for taking this opportunity to listen to our colleagues and grow with us as we dismantle structural white supremacy and systematic racism here in North Carolina Balance of State Continuum of Care. We would also like you to encourage you to select the who is viewing your of your meeting, especially for the people who don't want to have their cameras on. We definitely think this would help. That option is at the top of your screen, and it's also to help you see our panelists better in this virtual meeting today. So for our panel today, we've got some awesome speakers. Returning to our racial equity dialogue series is the excellent Teresa Robinson, who is the coordinated entry lead of our Balance of State Region 5, and among many other things. Teresa, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Teresa Robinson. I currently work at Community Link in Charlotte, North Carolina, although I live a few states away. I do participate on the Racial Equity Subcommittee as well, and subcommittees under that. I'm very happy to speak on the panel today. I look forward to questions in the chat, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent, excellent. And next is our Racial Equity Subcommittee, our all-star, Mrs. Dr. Denise Cole, who is a faith-based and crisis intervention counselor in Duplin County, as well as a member of our Racial Equity Subcommittee. Dr. Cole, will you introduce yourself today?
Good morning, Jeremy. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Denise Cole, based out of Duplin County, North Carolina. We are a faith-based organization, Spiritual Destiny International Ministries. We advocate for the homeless, the veterans, the mentally handicapped, and everyone in between. We do crisis intervention outreach. We're always trying to make things a little bit better, but having to deal with systemic racism makes it a little bit harder. So we hope we can make a difference and a change in each and every one's lives that we touch. And thank you, Jeremy, for having me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for taking the time out to be a panelist today. And our last panelist here today is Senator Natalie Murdock. Ms.
Hi.
Murdock is, how you doing? And you introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, Jeremy. I'm Senator Natalie Murdock, and I don't know if Jeremy knew this when I booked. I'm actually at COP26, so I am in Scotland, talking with folks all over the world about renewable energy, climate change. But what's very relevant to this conversation is how it impacts communities of color. So really thrilled to be here meeting Black and African leaders in this space from all over the world. So more excited than ever, but am state senator out of Durham, North Carolina District 20. In the state Senate, I serve on the Ag, Energy, and Environment Committee, some healthcare committees, as well as select committee on prison safety. Before that, I was elected at the county level as a soil and water district supervisor. So worked in various levels of government, so have a lot of different avenues that lead me to this work. So looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you. Like I said, we've got a great list of panelists today. I think all these women are phenomenal. They do some phenomenal work. And so we're going to jump right into our questions here. Thank you for the introductions, everybody. And Natalie, we're going to start with you. As I'm sure you know, many of the resources and opportunities for people experiencing homelessness rely on policy created by elected officials. We also know that, the challenging the legacy of racism in the homelessness system is daunting. So, what in your experience in the North Carolina General Assembly as a Black woman in politics, what is your experience? And how can you speak on that? And what do you see as your role in advancing racial equity through policy?
Yes, so many different pieces to that question. I mean, first and foremost, I'm going to state the obvious. I wish I lived in a world where everyone that I serve with, cared about the least of these as much as I do. And it really frustrates me that unfortunately that is not the reality. And you're dead on when you look at, the racial demographics. Not only, do you, oftentimes see far too many people of color that are on the street, but don't have access to those resources. If I didn't get to know one of the local leaders we have in Durham, so that, if I, approach someone that I constantly, just see them, on the street, not having resources, just kind of can go up to them and just say, hey, are you aware that we can connect you to these resources? These are different, services that we can work to protect you to. So really what I bring to the work is just humility and compassion. I often tell folks that I legislate from 360 degrees. I, oftentimes do get frustrated with how slow things move in Raleigh, but also am aware of what other services are out there. Are there public-private partnerships? I visited the facility in Raleigh that has, wraparound services for, so that from getting assistance with your medication to getting behavioral health services, whatever that looks like, creating a one-stop shop, and organized a cohort of folks from Durham, including Mayor Schul, at the time, the chair of our county commission, Wendy Jacobs, to say, let's visit this facility together to see, how could we create something similar in Durham. So I'm a believer in not reinventing the wheel. If you see that there are examples out there that work, let's learn from that. I wish we could do more with the funding for that, but I think that there are opportunities. Recently was appointed to another board by Governor Cooper to look at some of these services, as well as looking at the future of public health in North Carolina, they also have a role to play. As you know, a lot of programs where they take those health services to you, if you, currently don't have permanent housing. So bring a lot of compassion, a passion for just people, and just remembering that they're people, there's a reason that they got there, and that so many of us are 1 or 2 paychecks away from not having stable housing. So compassion and care is definitely what I bring to this space and work. And also looking at long-term models, not just simply charity, not just simply providing someone with a coat or a meal. They need that, especially now it's getting very cold. But long-term, but definitely with mental health services in the transit space is when I really learned that, when we would just have so many folks that were just on the bus all day because they didn't have anywhere to live and they didn't have services, for mental health assistance. So I think really looking at all of the support that folks need to get them in a more stable and solid situation.
Awesome answer. It's definitely a need to service people of color, especially in our homelessness system. Thank you for that answer. I'm now going to move to Mrs. Robinson. Teresa, as someone who works in coordinated entry, you see and meet a lot of people that flow through the homeless system. What are some of the impacts you see at the state and local level of policies on racial disparities in the homeless system? How can homeless service agencies impact the effects of systematic racism through their own policies and procedures?
The more I read this question, the more I realize it could actually be a whole thesis. So I'll try to keep this brief.
Yeah.
When we think about state and local policies, and my background is in public health as well. I went to school for public health and social work. The state and local policies are pretty much focused on fixing a problem that's already prolonged. For instance, all the policies surrounding homelessness all have homelessness in the title, but children aren't born homeless. They're born into families that are in poverty, and people aren't homeless. They lack the resources to sustain housing. So looking at the whole picture of things, systemic racism is something that limits the progression of people out of poverty. And that's a lot of the policy that we live around. And people that are in poverty, they're more likely to have a more limited scope and options when choosing their own path. And that leads them to the homeless service system, which is very structured, very organized, very regimented. And it's much easier for people to stay in poverty rather than lift yourself out, right? There's actually some housing programs that, and I'm not saying these things to attack the housing programs, it's really just critiquing based on issues that I've seen since doing this work. I've been in this work for about 5 years now. There's programs that are centered around helping individuals get into housing. You get that jump start to put the person in a housing placement, but then they're expected to sustain like forever and never come back into the homeless service system when their whole lives they've only experienced poverty. And so to retrain that mind, to restructure those systems that have been built around them, their understanding, their education, to do all that over in such a brief period of time is a lot to ask for a case manager who has a lot on their load already. And all of these things are involved with policy because the policy drives procedure, and that's how we do our work. The best way to treat the issues is by changing the communities that we live in. Speaking of certain policy that affects children, there's coordinated services, there's vouchers, there's supportive services that are offered to children that are experiencing homelessness. But which of these resources aren't tied to a limited budget and scarce resources? Even students in school, you can offer a parent a resource, but they have to do it within a certain period of time. They have to do it in these parameters. So it's it's a scarcity environment that we wrap around these homeless services as well, which is also another issue. Um, let's see, the largest share of resources come from government entities, where agencies are, like I said before, structured and organized, and there's a battle over these limited resources. And that goes down to even the shelters. The shelters have limited resources, and they depend on either government funding or private funding, all of which we know if we pool our resources, uh, communities actually do better, because that makes more people work together in communities, and so it creates more opportunities. Um, so getting back to the question, we have to fix communities by eliminating housing stock that isn't decent, eliminate the housing that isn't affordable in a community, and create communities that aren't scarce with resources. I know that sounds like a utopia, but it's something that's actually possible. It's something that's being done in other communities. There should also be policy to address poor landlords. I won't say bad landlords, but if there's bad behavior by a landlord, there shouldn't be policy to promote that. And we should also incentivize good landlords and promote affordable housing in our communities, real affordable housing, not band-aids that don't really address the issue. So I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Absolutely. I definitely snaps to you, but I want to stick with that point for 1 second and just ask you a follow-up question to that. Why is it important, for these agencies to be actively anti-racist in serving people experiencing homelessness?
It's important because of the housing history in America. The housing history in America for people of color has not been a positive one. And to address those issues, we have to attack the foundation of our entire system. We have to restructure things. We have to restructure things all the way around. We have to challenge the policy that's in place and move forward and be brave enough to create new things to really address the issues that we're having today. But we have to understand and acknowledge the history.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's definitely about dismantling the system. I definitely believe, especially in the state of North Carolina, rent control is definitely something, definitely something we need. One of those systematic things that people are facing. So absolutely, spot on. And I'm now going to shift our next question to Dr. Cole. Dr. Cole, you've worked in street outreach, intake work, crisis intervention for over 35 years. So I would say you're definitely qualified as an expert in this. We know that many of our political and programmatic systems were designed to uphold white supremacy, and we still have not fully stepped away from the legacy and impact of systematic racism. So my question to you is, what are some of the ways you see systematic racism and white supremacy impact your own work at the provider level in serving people experiencing homelessness?
Jeremy, I've seen a lot, but I want to read a quote that can help put things in perspective as far as systemic racism and homelessness. It's from the Constitution, and it reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States." This was a proclamation that President Abraham Lincoln made when he freed the slaves. What happened was white supremacy became systemic racism to keep those freed people of color still under the rule of throne. So they went from slavery to now they're penalized. They have convictions. Crime is running rampant. We know that the Americas were a penal colony. So just the history shows that systemic racism has been around to continue to keep the major perspective of things under a certain color or circle. If you're a person of color, you're more likely to have a conviction, a felony conviction, which bars you from the three main things that you need to survive. That's housing, education, and food. Not necessarily in that order. Food is more substantial, then comes housing, and then comes education. So as we look back over the history, we see homelessness as it's a way to keep a certain race of people under their thumb. You want it to be free, so we made you free, but we haven't given you the tools to survive that freedom. So that's what we're looking at. And when I go to serve the people that I serve, it breaks my heart because when you look at how the Constitution is set up, the local agencies and the state agencies adhere to these rules and regulations. So it's almost impossible to overcome what needs to be overcome in order to thrive, come out of homelessness. Everybody has a story that has been homeless. It may not necessarily line up with you, who, or what, but it's still a story. But what I've noticed, if you're a person of color, that story tend to lead to convicted felons, being categorized. Some of them start as early as middle school. They put them in diversified schools. Say, oh, well, you're going to alternative school because you're having behavioral issues. They not address those issues. They look at them, if they're children of color, oh, they got to come from thugs. Their parents got to be drug dealing, or they have to have substance abuse issues, or they have to be incarcerated. Those are the three strikes that are against people of color. So when you look at it, systemic racism is catered down through the ages. And in order for it to be addressed and changed, it has to come from the legislative issue. The same way that the Constitution put that loophole clause in there to appease those that still wanted to have the results and privileges of holding people in slavery, that has followed down through the centuries. That was done back in what, 1863 or 1865? So when you look at it, it's been an institution all that long. Nobody's tried to change it. Nobody's tried to think in terms, well, maybe this person, they made a mistake. So if you go to prison and you serve your time, why should you be penalized for the rest of your life? That's what I see that leads to disparities and homelessness in the communities of color. How do we rise above that? We have to find a way to work through the Constitution. Those things need to be changed. We need to start with our local community, county commissioners, our faith-based community. Then we need to take the step to our district. Then it needs to go to our state so our state can represent us on the national level that, look, these things need to be changed. They're archaic and they are mostly contributing to how we deal with the homeless. If a person of color comes in and they want to be interviewed, they're asked three major questions before they ever feel like they're going to get any service. Have you been convicted of a felony? Are you on drugs? Are you a substance abuser? Or, well, what did you do that led to this? Did you have a job? How's your job history? Those are the three things that they ask you. And when they ask you that, you feel like you are being monopolized because of the color of your skin. You know that they're not going to help you. At the end of that very degrading interview, you're told, oh, we can't do anything to assist you. So I think those are issues that are going to have to be addressed in order for us to get the homelessness to a level where it's not going to always be equal, but it can be better than what it is. Because what we see now, people of color, we have whole camps out in the woods. They're camping out in the woods. I'd say 75% of them are people of color. That includes the BIPOC community. So I think something needs to be done at the legislative level. And I'm going to stop right there because I got a whole soapbox.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Cole. Yeah, you spoke to a lot of things in that answer. It is definitely hard for people with records to obtain the housing, the food, just the services that they need. So I thank you for that answer. And so I'm going to, well, before we get into some general questions, I'm going to actually jump back to Natalie, Senator Murdoch, and we know that, climate change, or it definitely affects communities of color. It's often communities of color with substandard, housing. Thanks to, I would probably say, just years of, discriminatory practices. And so you spoke, a lot about that big picture idea that climate change and racial injustice share the same roots and have to be addressed together. And that there is no climate action that is not about racial justice. So the question that I have is, can you describe the links a little further you see connecting these two issues?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Jeremy. And you asked me that on the right day. In my weekly newsletter, was letting folks know that I was here. And a constituent actually emailed me and said, "Oh, that's great that you're, off in Scotland dealing with climate change, but what are you doing for communities of color?" Well, first and foremost, my legislative record shows communities of color are centered in all of the work I do, but specifically to climate change. I don't know why folks miss this connection, and that's why I'm here. And also why we're needed in this work, because to be clear, it's not the most diverse space. So that's why it's a space that I've been in for some time, because just because something is environmental or green, it doesn't mean that people of color are excluded. Space has to be made for us, but the reason we need to be here is we're more impacted than anyone else. And specifically with climate change, global leaders I'm talking to in the continent of Africa, limited resources can literally lead to wars if you just don't have enough access to basic resources and water. And, it can completely disrupt your government, and cause a civil war, so that's why we see a huge presence from the African continent here first and foremost. But even stateside, I have family from Wilmington, North Carolina. Recently, we all remember the horrible floods in New Bern. So imagine the difficulty of trying to get access to food, trying to get access to the ballot box when you don't have a home, when it's been flooded, or how expensive it is if you were born and raised in New Orleans and after Katrina packed up and moved. That's a different form of a immigrant or a refugee, is you have to leave your home because the conditions are that bad that you were, forced to flee because you don't have a home. Or looking at schools that have to be retrofitted because of mold in the schools due to flooding year after year after year. So now you need those resources. And when you look at the history of it, especially in the South, oftentimes people of color, we have access to land that is undesirable. It is in low-lying areas that are more than likely prone to flooding. So their farms, they may lose the land that they have because they can't even farm that land because of where it's located. So huge implications for climate change. And you're even seeing issues where if there's, a problem with pollution or the environment, leading to even more issues with Black maternal health. Just learning about that. So you'll see climate change language in federal Black maternal health legislation that we're working on, and we'll be doing the same here in North Carolina. So much overlap when you look at racial equity and climate change. And I'll also add food access. Oftentimes we say food desert, but it's food apartheid. There are policy decisions that were made so that complete communities don't have access to healthy food. That's also connected to climate change. Our inability to have access to fresh local produce just so that we could be healthy people. So from so many different aspects and so many parts of our lives, it's connected to the environment, it's connected to climate change, and we have to continue to educate folks to let them know this is an issue that we have to care about. It's not just a luxury, to say I would like to care about, you have to. And a lot of the leaders that I was with 2 nights ago, that's why you do see a movement that is supported, by the Movement for Black Lives. It's a red, green, a black, green, and new, red, black, and green New Deal instead of just a Green New Deal, to make sure that Indigenous people are also centered in addition to people of color, because we, quite frankly, have the most to lose if we can't figure out a way to get serious about climate change.
Absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head there. That's exactly, what this dialogue was centered for, and centered around. And just being able to connect these different systems of climate change, racism, homelessness, food access, absolutely. And so I'm going to now move to some of our more general questions. And these are for all three panelists to answer. You can definitely answer them in any order that you wish. So the first question is, what practices must we align in our homelessness response system to make it equitable and effective for direct services to executive leadership?
I guess I'll jump in and start. If I was to speak directly to executive leadership, we need to make sure that the leadership reflects the community by thought and by practice. Executive leadership literally guides who gets hired, who gets served, how you pay people, grants that you go after. Therefore, your executive leadership needs to reflect your community, and they need to have a touch point on the community. They need to know and connect with the leaders and have relationships with the leaders in that community so that they are more respected and that they have outreach. If COVID-19 has taught us anything, is that there are leaders in communities already that aren't in elected positions. They aren't making huge salaries. They're just doing grassroots work. COVID-19 taught us that, and executive leadership of any agency that's serving community needs to be in touch with these people, not only for connections to more people, but also for the respect in the community. That's how you earn that. And when it comes to direct services, every staff member needs to take some type of cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness training, and it should not be an offhand thing. I'm really excited to say that at the agency that I work for, we went through a several week course about cultural competency, and they took us through a history lesson. We did group activities. We cried, we shared, we had really deep conversations, and that awareness just brings a different level of understanding to the work that you do. But from that, you have to create agencies that can support people. I've heard by the other panelists on the call, you have to have wraparound services. And not only that, you have to fund these wraparound services because we all know it's very expensive. We need to create agencies that have a therapist, a crisis counselor, someone who can support a mom if she needs services for her children, veteran services, connections to DSS that aren't scary. We don't need parents thinking that they're going to lose their child when they come to shelter. Educational supports, job support, trade support, because if I've learned anything, even with 2 degrees, education is not the only way to get money. It's not the only way to elevate yourself out of poverty. We need to talk to people about home ownership. We need to educate them on rental policy because so many people live in substandard housing, and they live there because they don't know that they have other options. And not only that, there's not affordable housing to move to, but that's a whole nother issue. But we need wraparound services in these agencies, and we need an executive leadership that looks like the community that they serve.
Awesome. 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 Would any of our other panelists like to chime in on that question?
Really just quickly to jump in to fully agree, you have to have leadership that looks like the community. It is 2021, but it was 2020 when I got elected, and I was actually the first woman of color under 40 to even make it to the General Assembly. And the reason that I was so passionate about serving is the unique perspectives that we all can bring. I'm a renter. I'm one of the few renters in the General Assembly. I'm in one of the hottest housing markets in the nation. And in North Durham, we have, probably the number is higher now, but North Durham County, a home that went for $80,000 over asking price. So yes, So, and this is in Durham, not New York, not LA. So as it relates to, you know, homelessness specifically, of just being aware of just how folks are just really struggling to find it. I think we have entire zip codes where you cannot get a 1-bedroom apartment, again, in Durham County, for less than $1,200 a month. Entire zip code. So I think, you know, when people hear homelessness, they think of, you know, folks, you know, on a bench outside of the transit center, where folks that make money and work are working poor. They're not able to afford stable housing because of prices, because of, and also skipped over our inability to pay living wages. A phrase we're starting to use now with a thriving wage, you know, of not just stopping at $15 an hour, but saying, you know, what is needed for you to live in your area. You know, let's get rid of a specific number and say, you know, based on the cost of living in your area, this is what we should do. You know, how can we get there? And also executive leadership that considers other models. Was blown away with talking to one of the cab drivers here in Scotland. You do not, it's my understanding, have to have a lot of money down to buy a home. They don't have the same credit system. They don't have the same issue with banks and mortgages. So I've been blown away by not seeing a lot of people that are sleeping on the street at night. Not to say that they don't, but policy changes that we can make, of structural changes to our systems that keep people, you know, home insecure for decades. You know, there are systems created that want to keep you there. So I think we also have to have bold, innovative leadership that doesn't stop with, this is the way that things are. You know, we should not be afraid to do big things that are challenging. We have to completely reimagine our systems because we see that they are not working. As you mentioned earlier, because they are based on structural racism, because they are based on privilege and socioeconomic, you know, standards that may not make sense, you know, with the world that we live in today. We have to reevaluate all of it. Every model should be on the table. And we, again, have to stop looking at it as welfare. Housing is a basic need. It's a basic need. It is not a privilege. It is something that you should have a right to. You know, we should be more focused on keeping people in prison than giving people homes, a safe place to live. So I think that we need leadership that is aware, you know, of these issues, you know, that doesn't, a lot of people feel that that's not their duty as elected officials, and that's really unfortunate. And I think that's why you're seeing a wave of, you know, young leaders that are saying we want to completely dismantle, you know, the system that we have and create something that is more just and equitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We are now going to move into our Q&A section of this. And as I'm scrolling through the chat, I see a question here from Andrea, and it is for you, Natalie. What's the message that the General Assembly is missing from the homeless response system and folks with lived expertise? How can we get closer to the utopia of safe housing opportunities?
Yes, I think as far as messaging, the way that I would answer that question is to keep it local. All politics are local. I think when you are specific about services in that local county and that community, when you approach your legislative member, no matter where they may live, what I have found, particularly across the aisle, what the most effective strategy is to make it local. If you are, you know, someone that is working on these services in Person County, you need to approach your legislator that serves Person County. Make it really local to them to say, you know, these are the resources, you know, this is the center, this is the local, you know, DHHS service, whatever that conversation looks like. Make it really, really, really local. Be very specific with your ask. I would say, you know, what that funding looks like, what those services look like, if there's a new model, describing to them what that new model is. Something that I was pleasantly surprised to see in North Carolina, what works well across the aisle are models from other areas. There are 2 provisions I was able to get in the state budget. And sometimes, you know, there are other red states that do a better job than we do. And they were two models from Georgia, actually. And so since they were able to see that it was a model that was working in another state, they were open to it. So not to say that you'll always get that win, but I think with the messaging, it's really to make it local. You know, when they see that those are those constituents that live in their district, that is how you get folks' attention. And I think also back to not making it about charity, making it about long-term sustainable support. I think that's what people are missing. I think people look at a one-off of a shelter opposed to how can you really lift people out of their situation. I don't think that we're having enough conversations about that. I think there's a little bit of there's a little bit of opportunity there, you know, with some of my colleagues in power around that. But I think we have to really show them what those examples look like, and not directly related to homelessness, but in a roundabout way. I'll use an example, TROSA in Durham, funded every year. Majority members love that model. When I'd say, you know, these are folks that learn skill sets. They learn how to be landscapers. They learn how to, you know, do you know, engage in other skills and trades, get treatment and rehabilitation. But they have folks in that building that work with me that tell that story. They tell that story. They tell it really well. They show the statewide impact of the people that come from all over the state to go to TROSA. Even out of the state, we found, I know some folks from Virginia that ended up at TROSA. So use that as just one specific example of selling your wins and selling your success. Over communicating is what works well with leaders in the General Assembly.
Thank you for that answer. I am going to go to our next question. And this one is for Dr. Cole. I believe she actually has now two. But I'm going to go to that first one from Tracy from Thrive. Dr. Cole, I definitely agree with your discussion of how past convictions contribute to lifelong poverty and homelessness. What can we do to advocate for those laws to be changed, since many of them are federal? For example, Section 8 is federal. How do we work on that at the local level?
That's a good question, Tracy. And over the past 7 years, I've been working with a group out of Wayne County that's called the Fellowship Project. They have clinics that work to get charges expunged from different ones' records so that that can open the door for them to receive housing, public housing. Section 8 there is a component, and I think Stacy did address that with emergency housing voucher program. And the regional housing authorities, they do have discretion. They have, if you're a local housing authority, if you sit on that board, you will be able to help to steer those discretions to the ones, like we have a housing authority in Pender County. If you have a felony and you haven't been in any trouble in the past 10 years, then they will accept your application. They will take the Section 8 voucher. So those are the discretionary areas that have to be looked at. If your board is made up of people that don't understand and don't look like you, like Teresa and Senator Murdoch were saying, then there's going to be a hiccup in there. And some of those agencies have been in place for so long. They've been doing systemic racism practices for so long. They're not coming off their pedestal. The way to get them off their pedestal and address that and work through these programs, you're going to have to change that board. You're going to have to elect officials that are going to be understanding. They're going to be able to evaluate the situation and understand, if I've got a 65-year-old client that was convicted 30 years ago of drug trafficking. He's 65 now. He's lost all his assets, all his income. He cannot recoup back what he's already lost. He's been to prison. He served the time. He's been out 10 years. He's homeless because he's still paying for something that he's already served time for. So if you can use discretion, if your board, your housing authority board, can use discretion, look at his history. He's been rehabilitated. So he deserves decent housing, or she deserves decent housing. So those are the areas that we have to work through, Tracy. We've got to make sure that these boards, these agencies and their agency boards, that they are aware of all the options that are available, and they're willing to put in the extra hard work to make sure that those options can be met, and that we can deal with those people that have fallen through the cracks. Or more, they know they haven't fallen, they've been pushed through the cracks. Let's be honest about it. The ones that have been pushed through the cracks, that's what the Constitution was designed to do, to keep them pushed through the cracks. So we're going to have to be the bigger person, put the people in place that are going to get the job done effectively. They're not going to see color. They're not going to see a 10-year range of, hey, look, 10 years ago or 30 years ago, this person did XYZ. They're going to see what this person did after they were released. So one of our reentry programs works with that. They get those records expunged. They help them get training, education. We've got MOUs in place with barbers that they'll have an internship. And at the end of that internship, if they haven't gotten in any trouble, they'll go ahead, they'll sponsor them to get their license. Now you have a sustainable tax-paying member of your community. They can take pride in what they've done. They're able to give back. If you still want to say, oh, they need to pay the price, they're paying it, because trust me, when you pay taxes, you're still paying the price. So I think that's where those are the areas that we need to work in. We need to educate our board members. Our agencies need to have board members that reflect the diversity of our communities and what we're dealing with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just needing that leadership that reflects the community is hitting it right on the head. And so I'm gonna stick with you, Dr. Cole, because there is one more question here for you from Stacy Gibson. There is an EHV Emergency Housing Voucher Program that regional housing authorities can apply for that are available to felons. Um, our regional housing folks have them. Uh, our regional housing folks have them, and they have been very effective in helping some of the folks housed here. And so I also want to note that EHVs are a partnership with us and the housing authorities that receive the referrals through the coordinated entry system. And so I guess if you can, to speak a little bit about how these EHVs and how these systems affect the homelessness system and people of color.
I think the EHVs have been a very, very great thing. It was much needed. I like the way that they were presented. What I do not like is the agencies that have been in control for so long that practice systemic racism. Those agencies, they need to be dissolved, and new agencies need to be put in place that are going to address all the issues across the board. I don't have the privilege. When I go to the grocery store, I don't have the privilege of picking and choosing how much I want to pay for my groceries. There's a set price that's marked. If I change it, I'm going to jail. So I either have to, I'm serious. If I change the price, I'm going to jail. So I either have to agree to pay that price or fuss and move on. Most of the time I do the latter. I don't change prices, by the way. But what I'm saying is we need to understand that the changes that have, though, they are changes that have been implemented. HUD has implemented changes, Balance of State, NCCEH. We work hard at implementing changes that are going to benefit people across the board. So therefore, if we work that hard, the agencies that we serve need to also work that hard. There needs to be key guards, not guard places, but key guards put in place. If you see that agency has a history of not working to help all across the board, then something needs to be done. They're getting federal funds. Those federal funds are being released for them to use at their discretion. HUD doesn't know what's going on in your community. You do. So you're responsible for making sure that the people in your community get the funds and representation and assistance that they need in a humane manner. We're talking about humanity here. We're not talking about just because the color of your skin and I've stereotyped you, You could be the bum on the street. If I can help you get cleaned up, put some food in your belly, take you somewhere, get you educated, not necessarily a college degree, just I can go get you trained at Walmart. Every job that you have to be trained on. So get them in entry-level positions, give them hope. And those agencies, it starts with the agencies. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran. When I got out of the Marine Corps, you couldn't tell me that I couldn't conquer the world. I was just going to make some changes. A couple years later down the road, due to a house fire, I found myself homeless. And the agencies that I went to for help, they didn't give a crap about my military history. They looked at me, I was a woman of color. 3 questions they asked me that really ticked me off. Are you on drugs? What did you do to lose your job? Are you a convicted felon? Those are the 3 questions that they ask me. I'm sitting here with my DD 214s in front of me that has in big, bold, black and white letters, honorably discharged. And those are the questions that I was asked. And 30 minutes later, I was sent out the door with no help at all. So our agencies have to be accountable. I think that if the agencies are accountable, and what we're looking at, just like with emergency housing vouchers, there's discretion used there. No, we can't help sex offenders, but like Senator Murdoch said, torture does help sex offenders. We found that out a couple of years ago. That was one of the first things we found out through reentry. So you identify the resources. It doesn't matter what you think about that person. You send that person to the place that can better assist them. You let the counselors and the therapists work through the other stuff. But if you can get them the basic foundation, I think that they can be rehabilitated fully, get back on their feet. The agencies doing their jobs, making sure that everyone gets served, not just a select group of people. That's another soapbox, y'all. So I'm gonna go now.
Thank you again, Dr. Cole, speaking some real truth to power there. You said a mouthful, definitely wanting to hold people accountable and not judging them based on their situations. And so, wow, that was amazing. And I think we have another question here. I'm going to shift to Teresa. And her question is from Andrea. You mentioned the role of local landlords. Do you see the policies that promote poor landlord activities? I know there's been success in both rural and urban areas with the incentives for landlords, but are we starting from a place that encourages bad behaviors? That's a very good question.
Sorry, I'm using my phone, so I was clicking back to make sure to read the question as well. But this goes into the question that was asked, but it also speaks to what the other panelists talked about. And what I heard, the underlying thing that I heard was that there's so many practices in the homeless service systems that penalize poverty. And all the things that contribute to poverty. If criminal justice contributes to poverty, why is it a barrier to housing? And that's just a way to think that our policy influences the policy we're trying to make to fix something. And I think about the case managers that I talk to, and they just talk about all the barriers that someone has. And we're talking about barriers that stem from the effects of poverty. So I just wanted to bring that in the room because that's all I heard underlying with the amazingness that I heard from the panelists before. But speaking of the question, I have to go back and look at it. Talking about landlord activities, yes, we are starting from a place that encourages bad behavior. The stigma that's around housing and affordable housing and vouchers and rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing is a negative one. Oftentimes you hear agencies saying that they have to sell this voucher, sell this opportunity for this landlord. And if you're always a salesperson, you're not that's not a great relationship. I will admit once I got out of school with a master's degree, I couldn't find a job that paid me more than $30,000. And so I worked at a car dealership. So I know what sales feels like. And being in a sales environment is not one that's empowering for a case manager or the agency that's providing the service. And it puts the customer in control. And a lot of times, the customer being in control, the case manager is at the mercy of the customer. So it's not a great relationship that landlords have with housing agencies, and the agencies that do have successful outcomes with landlords, they incentivize, and they privately incentivize. It doesn't come from government resources typically, not completely from government resources. It's private, and it's really, it's a sucky system, unfortunately, because I don't see enough landlords actually lose their privileges of serving people with housing. And I think that is actually disgusting. Like, to make someone who already lives in poverty in a non-decent housing, that is just, that it's just bad on top of bad. So it is a terrible system, unfortunately, and I want it to be better.
Real
Absolutely.
quickly, I would agree, and something that I've been talking of. I think they're going to start it back again in Durham, but I'm sure other communities do this. Our mayor in Durham, current mayor, Mayor Schul, they have a landlords roundtable to talk about these sorts of issues, and we have our local housing authority there. Talks of that came up again when we unfortunately had a very public case of someone that was in public housing through a voucher program, and there was mold and mushrooms in the home, and ABC 11 filmed the entire thing. And it's sad that it took that, but after a result of conversations I had, folks realized that during the pandemic they had stopped having those landlord roundtables. But the purpose of those is to encourage people to join these programs. Like you said, unfortunately, it is like being a salesperson, but of just making folks aware that if you have property, we want to know how can we work with you to get people housed, but to explain the programs, to explain the parameters, to really walk them through that process. Because what we're finding, the reason I also chimed in with this housing market, a lot of people do not want to rent anymore. They just rather sell and cash out. So we actually will have to do a lot more outreach, because folks that own property right now really would rather sell opposed to renting it out to someone in need. We're seeing that.
Well, thank you all. Not seeing any more Q&A questions. Thank you, Teresa and Senator Murdoch, for those last two answers. You definitely spoke to some issues, regarding these landlords. And so, seeing none left, I want to thank you all again for being
Jeremy,
here.
we do have one more question. Sorry, it just got put in the chat, and it's a really good one from
Okay.
Tracy again.
All right, Tracy. And her question is, isn't part of the problem the fact that we have to stick to FMR for rent? We wouldn't have as many clients in substandard housing if we could spend more. And FMR, Laurel, I guess that stands for
Fair market rent.
fair market. Thank you for clarifying that. And that question can be to any other panelists to answer, and whoever wants to just chime in and jump in here.
I'm gonna jump in there, Jeremy. I was trying to be quiet, but I do
No, go
believe
ahead.
that fair market rent that has not been increased in how many decades? So we're still basing a family of four. I'm just throwing figures out there, by no means accurate now. Just using as an example, a family of four, they're only allowing $650 a month. That $650 a month barely covers a single 1-bedroom apartment in some areas now. So you're trying to put a whole family in a house in decent housing for $650 a month. That's not even a mortgage payment, basically. So I think those issues do need to be addressed. And once again, proposals have to be written to address what's going on in your area. Like what we're looking at in Duplin County, we have our commissioners do not understand that they have a homeless issue. So we're looking at trying to build affordable housing around not having the support that we need to address the issue. So what's going to happen when those affordable housing apartments or buildings go up? We're still going to be pressed with how to make things do with the fair market rent. So I think that those are things that do need to be addressed. Now is a good time to address them because HUD is open right now. They're open to change. They're open to try to make things more equitable for people of color. So I think what we need to do, come together as leaders for fair market rent and fair housing and substandard housing issues and address these issues and say, hey, look, the average rent is $1,200 a month. The best way to get people off the street, if they can get decent housing, some of them can go to work. They just need to be stabilized. So if you can get that housing issue straightened out, then you're going to have working class people. They got a sense of pride and hope about themselves if they've got standard housing. I don't want to invite anybody over to my home and I got rugs over holes and then you're sitting down there and you see little bugs and rats running. I'm just being honest. You see bugs and rodents running across the house. Nobody wants to live like that. But at the end of the day, we have people that live like that every day. So your hope is lost because you're still stuck in fair market rent. So I think we do need to address that. I think we need to sit down and write some proposals, Teresa, and try to change some things because I think we can in unison. We've shown when we come together collectively and address the issues, what an impact we can have on those issues. So I think that's what we need to continue to do. And fair market rent is one of those issues that we need to address.
Thank you for that, Dr. Cole. Thank you.
I took a while to respond because I had to do a Google search. I looked up fair market rent, and on HUD's website it says fair market rent is generally calculated as the 40th percentile of gross rents for regular standard quality units in a local housing market. That alone speaks to why it doesn't address the homeless service system. It has to do with solely just rent prices. And for that reason, it's not thinking about the homeless service system and what people are actually making in communities, what people can afford in communities. It's saying what people charge in communities. And it all goes back to data with that question. You're using faulty data to give to create a policy that's, again, penalizing people who don't have money. And it's just a faulty number. What I'm seeing, it's a faulty number, unfortunately.
Truly a faulty number. And so thank you all again for those answers. Excellent points being made, Teresa. And that's, definitely what this dialogue is about, bringing different people together from different parts of the homelessness system or policy or advocates, and just making sure this information gets into people's hands. We touched on a lot today: informal leaders organizing, fair markets, systemic racism, a lot of different things today. And so with that being said, just, I want to thank everybody for being here. Want to thank, everybody for taking the time out today to just log on and sit with us and listen to these just awesome, amazing speakers. I'm going to try to share my screen here as well. And so definitely, in closing, I want to start off by thanking the North Carolina Coalition in Homelessness Balance of State, COC, Racial Equity Subcommittee. I would like to thank our Racial Equity Dialogue Work Group. And on that work group is, Andrea, Laurel, myself, Tambra Chamberlain, Denise, Teresa, all of these folks made this panel happen today. So thank you all. And our panelists, Senator Natalie Murdoch, Dr. Cole, Teresa Robinson, just thank you all for speaking a lot of truth to power here today, especially Senator Murdoch joining us all the way from COP 26, which is, definitely a little whiles away from North Carolina. So we also want to thank, I want to thank too, the NCCEH staff, Brian, Ryan, Andrea, Allie, Ashley, all of the people that, all of the staff that I've seen today in the chat. Just thank you for your support. And thank you for anybody that just logged on and registered. This was definitely a great conversation. So, we didn't dismantle white supremacy with the conversation. So it's up to each and every one of us to have these conversations in our everyday lives, right? At your water coolers, at your jobs, with your family, with your friends. So we definitely look forward to seeing you again in 2022. This will be our last dialogue of the year, but we definitely are energized to continue these dialogues and continue this work because it is so important. And so with that being said, I would like to thank everyone and adjourn this dialogue. Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye.